G'day and welcome to this Module 2 recording for ECM212. Today we are talking about scientific knowledge about the body and the study of human movement. And if you look at the unit outline, we're also going to touch on reflective practices and teaching. So while that doesn't show up in the Module 2 information, I've added a little bit to my presentation, which I'm going to go through today. And that's because it shows up in the unit outline. So there's the three sections, the three topics, which is number 1, social construction of the body, number 2, physical education and the study of human movement, and then reflective practices and teaching. If you'd like to follow along, then open up LearnLine and head to the ECM212 unit and follow along on Module 2. The reflective practice of teaching stuff is very short, and in the textbook you'll find it in the very last chapter, which is chapter 28, reflecting on your teaching. Okay, you can also scroll right down to the very bottom and click on the link down here to download the Module 2 presentation, which I've created. I feel like it's a little bit more substantial than the one that was up there, and I do apologise sincerely for the lack of punctuality, and I think spelling's alright, but definitely the punctuality and the way that the text flows. I need to go through this, but being my first semester lecturing, I'm not going to get a chance to probably fix a lot of this stuff up this semester. So bear with me, and it's all still there, it all still makes sense. Okay. So health and physical education 2. The three topics we're talking about, as I said, social construction of the body, physical education and the study of human movement, and reflective teaching practices. This is the one where I'm very much excited about talking about, because topic 2 is something I know plenty about. Before we get into that though, social construction of the body. So anthropometry research perceives the construction of the body as subjective. It's not objective, which means that it's how you perceive your own body is subjective to what you think and feel. So whether it's what you think other people are thinking about you, or what you're thinking about other people, and so on, and what you're thinking about yourself, it's all subjective. So you know how you can have some days you look, you are great, you've got a great body, you've got a great personality and so on, but you look in the mirror and some days you just feel just yuck. So it's funny how our perception of ourselves can change based on what we're thinking and feeling at the time, and that's a result of hormones and food we've eaten and exercise we've done or haven't done and so on. So there's a whole bunch of different influences which impact that. But someone who, if you look at and you think, wow, they've got a ripping body, but they might be feeling, like they're having a fat day. And then anorexia is an example, an extreme example of this, in terms of the thinking being distorted in terms to what other people can perceive. So social construction, it's also a social construction of the body. A social construction of the body is what students bring to the classroom and vice versa. So students will socially construct their body based socially and culturally on their background, and that's what they're bringing to the classroom, and it's also what they're taking away from the classroom from your lessons. The body is constructed intersubjectively, so between people. So you develop this subjective opinion about your body. You've got your kind of short-term feelings about your body, and you've got your long-term. So something could be more stable. So you might generally feel like, yeah, you've got a very good body when you compare it to other people. So when you look at other people's bodies, you then compare your body to them and make an assumption on what your body is like based on that, based on what you see around you. So inter being, from you to somebody else, not within. So you're comparing and you're making those assumptions. can be culturally and socially. So your cultural backgrounds can influence how you perceive your body, and also the social circles that you run in also impact how you perceive your body. So it's constructed in all these subjective ways based on the environment that you're in. Our body is the image we have of ourselves. So what you see when you perceive somebody is the perception that that person has of themselves. So, you know, when you see people walking around slouching and looking really kind of like, you know, not real excited, not real happy, then they're giving off this perception of what they think about their body. Whereas when you see someone who is walking, you know, standing tall, shoulders back, looking very confident, and of course perceptions can be a mask, and you can, you know, an example of a very extreme example of comedians who commit suicide, for example, like Robin Williams, who have, you know, on the surface look like they're, you know, the most fun-loving people to be with, but in actual fact they're really struggling with all these demons inside their own mind. But typically your social construction of your body is what you give out. So what people are perceiving you as is the way you're perceiving yourself. So when you see someone who is tall and standing tall and confident, then they're typically perceiving themselves as, you know, confident. And you can trick yourself by doing that. You might not be feeling confident, but you get into a confident position, a confident pose, and you can create that confidence. You can trick your body, and all of a sudden, you know, like if you're feeling tired and you slouch and you're doing this, then your body has this ability to be able to understand, okay, well, that means I'm tired, I must be tired, and you feel more tired. But when you're feeling tired, if you can sit up and, you know, be alert and act alert and just pretend, look like how someone who would be engaged and energetic would look, then you can trick your body into feeling like that. Sometimes it's much deeper than that, and, you know, you might be very, very fatigued and need to just have a sleep. But you can actually trick it, at least in the short term, at least for a small amount of time, into being more energetic and more enthusiastic and alert. So our body is the image of how we think others perceive us as well. So what you see in somebody is an image of what that person thinks other people perceive about them. So we're getting a little bit tricky, and I'll let you pause for a second and just consider and ponder that for a moment. So my body is an image of how I think you perceive me, for example. So the way I'm sitting is the way I think you perceive me as being, you know, knowledgeable and confident as the lecturer of this unit. We strive to, if I was nervous, then I might be sort of sitting there and doing this and talking and so on, and not looking very confident. But I'm very confident with this content. So we strive to present our body in a way in which we want others to perceive us. So, and I would argue that everyone does this to a vast majority of people would do this to a very, to a high amount, because we want people, regardless of what people might appear like, on the surface, 99% of people want others to perceive them in a positive way. There may, you know, there's different, we're very, very complex beings, us human beings, and so there's all these different things which are coming together and playing, and it may be that believing that people are perceiving us in a negative way can, in a way, be a positive feeling, because that's what we've been used to as a child if we've been put down constantly. But more often than not, people want to be perceived in a positive way. Social construction of ideas, knowledge, and individuals' experiences of health and medicine in Western societies uses an interdisciplinary approach. So for more information on that, head on over to LearnLine and just have a look through that content through here. But what this is about is saying that Western society uses an interdisciplinary approach into socially constructing your body. So it's a construction of ideas, so ideas about what you should look like, should think, should feel, and so on, and knowledge of your individual experiences of what health is and what medicine is in Western society is what that's getting at. I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied there and probably confusing, but at the end of the day, social construction of the body from a medical perspective is a social construction of ideas, knowledge, and individuals' experiences of health and medicine in Western societies. And in Western societies, it uses an interdisciplinary approach. Okay. All right. Health, illness, and disease are seen as socio-cultural products. So in Western societies, health, illness, and disease is seen as a social cultural product. So when you do get illness or disease, or you have positive health, it's a result of social and cultural influences coming together. For example, someone who is obese, it's a result of the social influences in their life a lot, and the environment that you live in. So the type of food you put in your fridge, or don't put in the fridge and then have to go and buy takeaway food, say, for example. So that's an example of how social cultural influences impact your health, your illness, and your health, and if you have illness and disease. Analysis of health, illness, and disease must be done through one's social and cultural representations and symbolic meanings. So if you're going to analyse one's health, positive or negative, and if it is negative, the illness and disease, it must be done through one's social and cultural representation. So how they're representing their life. So what food means to them, for example. Is food a means to an end? Is there emotional relationships with food in order that creates them to eat too much or to eat the wrong food, say, for example, and symbolic meanings of food. I remember I worked with a lady actually in the fitness industry who was, I think she was probably about 160, it was 160, 180 kilos, and so she wanted to lose some weight, and it was very difficult working with her. But one of the things that she would do was she would eat cake every day, particularly in the mid-afternoon. So there was this trigger in her which sent us a message saying time to eat cake. It was around 3 o'clock. It was mid-afternoon. She owned her own business, so she was able to get away whenever typically she wanted at that point in her business. And she was given cake when she was a young child, and that was a sign of love. And so her mother and her grandmother used to give her cake and say, "Oh, you're such a lovely child. You're so beautiful," and say all these positive things to her as they were giving her cake and telling her that because she was so cute, she could have some cake and so on. So she learned that cake meant love, and as a result, she developed this really strong emotional attachment to cake. Which she was then using around mid-afternoon every single day. So getting her to stop eating that cake was very difficult, but one way you would do it is to not remove it immediately. So there's a whole bunch of different things, and it might be that you start off with simply swapping it for something else, or just reducing the amount, or replacing it with something a little bit more healthy, but also incorporating the cake in. Off topic. Okay. So the body is spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, and that comes from Drozdow in 2002. It's also on Lone Line. And the body has the ability to grow, develop, and be taught in everyday living, and should not be treated as scientific measurements. So in terms of treating somebody, I've spelled that wrong. There, that should be a Z. In terms of treating people medically, people should not be considered healthy based on scientific measurements, but treated functionally on the whole. So not to treat symptoms, but to treat the human being as a whole organism. So why, not just what are those symptoms, but why has somebody been led into developing those symptoms? So really going right back and looking holistically at one's life and looking further back than just what the symptoms are saying. Because when we look at just simply symptoms, we're very inclined to treat with medicine. And in many cases, we don't need to treat with medicine. We need to treat with food and with movement. And Pete Evans likes to say, food is medicine. I've heard that multiple times. Dr. Eat Fat, Get Thin. I forget his name. It'll come to me later. As well as Dave Asprey, who's the man behind the Bulletproof Coffee, who's a businessman. He's not necessarily a doctor. Mark Hyman, it is, Dr. Mark Hyman, Eat Fat, Get Thin. They talk a lot about food is medicine, but I like to say, in addition, I love that saying, but I also like movement is medicine. And so often we can treat so many illnesses and diseases in our lives today in 2017 through, putting different foods into our system, removing foods out of our system, particularly those which are the most common in terms of intolerances, so dairies, soy, gluten and wheat, egg products. There's so many which in today's day and age people have intolerances to, and I truly believe there's people that say, they're just made up, but I truly believe that that these intolerances are true based on farming and the way food is produced, as well as movement. So moving more is always going to be effective, but it's not one or the other. I think it needs to be a combination of the two. Okay, physical education and the study of human movement. Physical education is the field of knowledge concerned with the theoretical and practical study of human movement. Physical education is the field of knowledge concerned with the theoretical and practical study of human movement. So physical education terminology, so there's different ways you could talk about physical education. One of them is, you hear a lot more in today's day and age, is physical literacy. Essentially, physical literacy is just another way of saying physical education. In a way, it's just one part of physical education, but it's also becoming used synonymously with physical education. So PL for short. But physical literacy is essentially about developing, just as the way you would develop literacy through developing a child in terms of, recognizing letter names, letter sounds, chunking and putting two letters together. For example, TH sounds th and SH sounds sh, and so on. And then go into sight words, so very simple words like and then develop reading like that. Physical literacy is essentially the fundamental movement of arm of physical education, where we're talking about developing movement patterns. So just in the way we've developed reading in a child, particularly around that age of 5 and 6 years old, we need to develop physical competence, so physical literacy and understanding of how the body moves. And the most basic fundamental moves to human movement are 6: squat, lunge, push-up, pull-up, bend, and brace. So a brace is most commonly practiced in terms of a plank, and a bend is like a deadlift move, if you're familiar with the gym, and doing a hinge at the hips. So it's keeping your knees directly above your ankles and hinging forward at the hips with a straight back. The brace is fundamental to the other 5, so the squat, lunge, push-up, pull-up, and bend. But it's also its own exercise because it's important to practice the bracing on its own. So they are the 6 fundamental movements to human movement. There's actually a 7th one as well, but it's you don't really need to practice it, and that's rotate or rotation. So physical literacy is one component of physical education, which is becoming more and more is being used more and more synonymously with physical education, and it is certainly a very, very important aspect of PE. You've also got exercise and sports science, kinesiology, human kinetics, human performance, and physical activity. So they're all different words you might come across in physical education. I put physical activity in there, or for short PA, because I want to touch on, is that physical education? Is physical activity the same thing as physical education? And just as the way physical literacy is one part of physical education, so too is physical activity. It's a very important part. It's very important that children have a positive and enjoyable experience in physical education, so that they are more inclined to want to participate in physical activity later on in life, whether that's with organised sport or in terms of just general fitness, or just to be physically active and play with their own children when they're adults and continue to be physically active into older age. So it is very important and a very important part of physical education, but it is just one part. Most PE consists of physical activity and sports skill development. So when you look, and I've been, I've done this myself, where I've just thought PE was all about developing sports-specific skills. So, okay, we're doing cricket kids today, for the next 5 weeks, and we're going to learn how to bat a ball, catch a ball, throw a ball, bowl a ball, and so on. Or we're going to do basketball, we're going to learn how to dribble a ball, shoot a ball, and pass a ball, and so on. So you go and you teach those skills, and then you go into a game and you play a game and you teach them skills in a game sense environment. And that's your way of getting physical activity across. And so getting kids to just run around in an unstructured sense is valuable, but that's what recess and lunch is for. So physical education is getting kids to run around in a bit more of a structured sense, so they're doing so in a game and developing skills. But that's not the only thing that physical education is. It's much more than just physical activity and sports skill development. It is these aspects of physical education. So you've got physical competence, and I've already touched on the 6 foundation moves: squat, lunge, bend, brace, push-up, pull-up. In there you've also got animal moves, so moving like an animal. So frog jumps are a great way to develop physical competence. Crab walks, so lifting your bottom up and making a nice flat table. And you can get kids, take their hat off and put the hat on their tummy and get them to balance their hat or a cone on their tummy. Duck walks is a great way for developing, strength, but also mobility of the joints. And then we've got bear crawls, so another great one for developing physical competence, and emu walks, kangaroo hops, zombie walks, and so on. Zombie, not so much of an animal. But so physical competence is very, very important because it underpins the ability to be able to do all the sport-specific stuff. So when you are playing basketball, for example, in order to be able to run along and dribble the ball, you need to, you need to be able to run, and 2, just say you're performing a layup, for example, to be able to run up and then with the ball coordinate and jump off one leg, you essentially are getting into different positions which are underpinned by those foundational movements. So a lunge or a squat, typically a lunge in the example of a layup, and so on. So you need to be strong in those 7, including the rotation movement, in order to be able to perform that layup. So without being strong in those positions, getting kids to, consider this: is it irresponsible to be getting children to do sports-specific stuff which they don't have the underpinning foundational development, physical development for? Because, so to go and start having children perform the skills that are required, sport-specific skills that are required in a game of basketball or cricket or tennis, say, for example, without giving them the underpinning physical literacy, is that irresponsible? Is that taking away part of their development? And I'll put it into literacy terms. If you were to start practicing and getting kids who are really young to develop the ability to be able to recognize letter names and letter sounds, but then you don't do any work on any chunking, say, for example, and sight words, and then all of a sudden you start getting them to try and read a 30-page book with much more complex punctuation and spelling and grammar and so on, would they be able to do it? They might be able to figure out their way. The human body is an exceptional thing, and they might be able to figure out a shortcut, but they're missing that big gap in their development. So it's the same with physical literacy, physical competence. You need to continue that along. And, I hear so often that, that's what kids do. They should have developed this competence when they're younger. Well, if they didn't develop it in literacy or numeracy, you would go back and you would fill those gaps because it would be very difficult to move forward. The body is exceptional at being able to bridge those gaps in physical terms. So people learn a way of being able to do those different movements without having the underpinning skills which have neatly progressed. So it's very important, regardless of what age you're at, to develop physically in order to be able to develop the sport-specific skills which are going to be important later for not only participating in the activity but also for enjoying being able to perform the activity to an appropriate standard and be able to enjoy it. So you've got locomotive skills, and inside the locomotive skills there are 8. So we've got running, jumping, hopping, leaping, and leaping is sort of similar to jumping, but it's like jumping from one foot onto the other. So that's a leap. You've got kicking and striking, so striking a ball off a T-ball stand, for example, and throwing and catching. All very important locomotive skills, and they're all examples, they're pretty much examples of gross motor skills. So fine motor skills being using the smaller muscles, for example, very commonly taught in art, where you are teaching painting or colouring in or drawing, the ability to be able to finely control something. And then you've got gross motor skills, which is your bigger muscle groups. So jumping is an example of developing gross motor skills. Running is another example of developing gross motor skills. You've got running skills as well and speed development. So we as human beings walk and run a lot. Some people don't run as much later on in life, but running is still a very basic skill, much more fundamental to human movement than what swimming and riding a bike is. They are also sport-specific skills which need to be developed, so the ability to be able to ride a bike or to be able to swim. But running skills is really fundamental to being a human. So developing the ability to be able to run appropriately is very important as well. Sport-specific skills I've touched on enough already in terms of, basketball, passing, shooting, and so on. Football, kicking a ball, hand passing a ball, marking a ball. And then you've got mental skills as well, which is an aspect. And with confidence, you can develop resilience through physical education, commitment. We talked about this in a game of spiders and flies this morning in another class, in a practical class where we were playing a game. And someone went up to the first line, they tried to get through, and there was a gap that was created. They went through it, and they had to get through a second line, and there was a gap, so she just went. So I pointed out how that was commitment, and she saw the gap through one line and just went straight through the second one, and because she committed, she made it through. Whereas if she had hesitated for a semi-second, then she probably would have not made it. It's a great way to develop discipline, mental toughness, and even creativity. Other aspects of physical education include dance. Drama is another one which I don't have on the list, but dance is a form of physical education, a component of it. It's very much based around physical competence, sports, like specific skills, and learning specific dance moves, as well as physical activity. In there, you also, again, you develop those mental skills of confidence, resilience, creativity, and so on. Your sport education, which is where we start looking at coaching and officiating and all the other aspects of sport. Outdoor education, rock climbing, abseiling, orienteering, survival out in the wilderness, out in the bush. And then last of all, aquatics. And so being able to not only know how to swim and rescue yourself, but to be able to rescue others, and, aquatic skills to know, is this a safe body of water to be jumping into? How should I enter this water? Is this a safe body of water to even be getting into in the first place? The conditions around that body of water, are they safe? So all those associated components of aquatics. So in higher levels of physical education, so as you start to get into the higher grades, we can go off into different streams and sort of touch on basic exercise physiology. So how the body works in terms of exercise. Biomechanics, the way the body moves. Anatomy and physiology, so anatomy being the names of things, so the names of bones, muscles, and energy systems and so on. Physiology, the way the body works, so the way that the cardiovascular system works, the way respiratory system works, and so on. Sports psychology, so the way you think and feel. So psychology is all about thinking, feeling, behaving. Essentially is the most fundamental way to describe psychology. Sport history, so the history of sport. For example, the Olympics modern Olympics starting in 1896, 100 years in 1996 in Atlanta, is one example of history of sport in terms of Olympics. So there's so much history to do with sport, and it can even be a career path to become a sport historian. Public health, so looking into different strategies for improving public health. Your physical activity, so looking for ways to make people more physically active. So we're starting to get more into straddling the sport industry as well as the fitness industry. Sport coaching and officiating, health and physical education, teaching, sport management, so managing athletes, for example, elite athletes, and then sport philosophy. The definition of human movement is the scientific study of how the human body works, with particular focus on improving the workings of the human body for sport, fitness, and well-being. It covers the physiological, biomechanical, and psychological systems of the body. I really like that and find that valuable, that definition. The benefits of a sound understanding of human movement include you can help to increase athletic performance in somebody. So you can use what you learn through this course. Particularly if you were to go into the fitness industry, go on to do a certificate 3 and 4 in fitness, or complete a sports science degree, or whatever it might be, you can help people to increase their athletic performance. So improve their fitness, whether it's strength or stamina or flexibility, in terms of for the purpose of performing better in sport. You can treat injuries. Again, you're not a physio, you may be, but unless you've done a physio degree, then you can't really be treating injuries. So while you can treat injuries, this is all about treating injuries at your level. So understanding, for example, the RICE principle. So rest, when somebody hurts themselves, rest, ice, compression, elevation, for example, as a basic way of simple sporting first aid. You can go and do a level 1 sports trainer course, and then you can then sort of treat injuries to a little bit more in depth of a level. You can implement rehabilitation, so you can start to help people rehabilitate without being a physio and diagnosing people. Follow a plan and help someone implement that plan, which has been given to them by a qualified professional. You can help people improve their fitness. Again, you'll need to do the appropriate accreditation to do so, but you can then help people to improve their fitness, whether that's for general fitness or some other, whatever the purpose may be. Provide advice based on the way the body works to your level, and create a sense of well-being. So to move into reflective teaching practices, which is about relying on authority. So in the textbook, this is where I got a lot of this information from. So Ravengo, 1992, said that relying on authority to direct your life places you at a disadvantage in life. So somebody who is reflective, has developed the skills of being reflective, has a much greater advantage in life because they're not relying on somebody to tell them what they should be thinking. So people who just accept information because it feels like it's an authority which is giving it to you are at a disadvantage to life, according to Ravengo in 1992. Another spelling mistake. According to Ravengo, student teachers can be classified as one of 3 in terms of reflective teaching practices. So recalcitrants, for whom reflection was seen as irrelevant. So there's some who will see reflection as being irrelevant and pretty much just a waste of time. Acquiescence, for whom reflections was seen as a means to an end. So you just did the reflection because you were told you had to. You had to write lesson plans. You had to reflect on those lesson plans in your pre-service teacher practice. So you just do it because you have to do it. Or once you start teaching, your senior teacher or assistant principal asks you to reflect on your lessons and supply that reflection. So you just do it because they tell you have to. And then the third one is committed reflectors, and they are the people who saw the value and reflection about teaching and schooling. Let's see if I can say them again. Recalcitrants, acquiescents, and committed reflectors. So guidelines for reflective questions, and this again comes from the textbook. So there's 3 here, so you can look at because if you just consider, was that a good lesson? Did all the kids understand what I was saying? You might just say, yep, they all understood, but did they actually learn anything? Was the activities that you used appropriate to their developmental level or their skill level? So you can reflect but not actually get much information out of it. So if you use these 3 guidelines for asking reflective questions, then you can get much greater insights into a lesson that you've conducted or anything in life that you're reflecting on. So consider the ethical, social, political, and moral aspects. For example, did I make assumptions about students' ability levels? So did I assume that, by looking at these kids that they'd be really talented? So, for example, you get these naughty kids and you see them normally out there and playing basketball and they're really good at it, and you're out teaching tennis. They're gun basketballers, but, did you make an assumption by the activities that you prescribed for them, that you wrote down in your lesson plan, that were far too hard, and it just made the lesson a mess because they were doing stuff which was just beyond their competency levels? And I've seen that actually, and I've done that myself, where you've gone and done tennis and it's, all of a sudden someone or group of kids that can have unbelievable hand-eye coordination are just completely uncoordinated with this extended stick on the end. So instead of having to make contact with a ball with the hand, they're having to make contact out here, and just that difference can be very, very difficult. Some kids will pick it up very fast. Even though that will be something they haven't done before, they'll have the skills to be able to learn that new skill very quickly. But there's also a lot that can't make that change quickly, and it will take a lot of practice, and they'll need easier and more simple activities to be able to develop that skill. The second guideline is consider values, goals, and relevance of the program. So, for example, am I focusing too much on ball skills? So did I spend too much time focusing on sport-specific skills? Did I not spend enough time on physical development, physical competence? Am I giving them sport-specific skills which are requiring fundamental movement skills, physical competence, which is just not there? So the sport-specific skills are just way too advanced for where they're physically competent at. An example of that could be the layup in basketball, but it really takes a very trained eye to be able to see that, and often like videoing and freeze framing, slow-mo video and photos to be able to see poor movement patterns, particularly if the eye is not trained as a teacher or coach. And then the last one is instructional methods, strategies, and materials. So could I incorporate more open questioning? Did I do something and say, did you like that? Yep. Did you like that? Yep. Particularly with some cultures, and even genders, they may say yes because that's what they've been taught to do. You just say yes to be polite. Yep. I understood that. And then you go and do an activity and you realise, geez, they didn't understand anything that I said. So, could you incorporate more open questioning? And how could you do that? And open questioning is a real skill. And it might even be as simple as just a statement. It might not actually have to be a question. But you might be teaching javelin, say, for example. And it might be that you see someone and they're not doing something the way, like it's really poor technique. And so rather than saying, do you think that's working? Yes or no. So you make which is a closed question. So you make an open question, which is, what do you think you're doing right? What do you think you could do better? Which is much better. But another way of doing it as a statement could be that arm. That arm. Just say that arm and just see what they come back with. They may need more prompting, but some people will be able to run with that and go, what's he getting at? He's talking about my arm. What? And they'll then start to, analyze and evaluate what they're doing. They'll get a visual representation of themselves in their own mind, and they'll go, oh, I think my arm's too far out to the side. I need to come more straight over the top, and that might be exactly what you want them to do. But by doing that, you've got them to realise and understand in a much more comprehensive way than saying you need to pull your arm straight over the top. You're going too far out to the side. So it's a real skill, and this is where we're getting into now, the skill of coaching and teaching, as opposed to you being able to do the skill. And that's where you don't need to be the best person at the skill in order to be able to coach it or teach it. You do need to be the better of a coach you are, typically the better of a questioner you are. The ability you've got to be able to educate and inform and get your students or your athletes to get to the solution themselves. So self-guided discovery is massive, giving children the ability to just guide themselves through the journey and just see. So much less talking, much more action, and really, open-ended questions. So strategies for becoming a reflective teacher. So you can keep a journal. It's very valuable. Something which I feel awkward saying because it's something, off the record, and don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but, I'm new to lecturing and pretty raw, so I'll say it. But I hated the idea of reflecting when I was at university and when I was on prac and when I first started teaching. And I remember writing these really detailed lessons in my, the early years, the first year of teaching, and trying to reflect, by writing down after every single lesson how I think that went. And it was just far too much. There wasn't enough time in the day to just do the reflections, let alone to actually plan and get ready for the very next lesson. But keeping a journal, if you can, and keeping it at the same time, so you turn it into a habit, so you make it a routine and a habit, and then which then develops into a habit by, you may be having set questions, so it makes it very easy. It has to be creating a new habit like that needs to be easy. So having questions set, and it might just be one question to start with. It might then evolve into two, it might then evolve to three, but not making it bigger than, making it into a textbook. But, keeping questions there so, it's very simple and easy for you to go to and just respond to that. And if on a day you don't want to write, a big long thing, you give yourself permission to just write one word or one line or a couple sentences. But you make the commitment to yourself to journal at the same time every day, and however that works for you. And it might be on a computer, it might be by writing it with a pen or pencil, or it might be that you record it on your phone, your smartphone. But keeping a journal is a very effective strategy for reflecting, not just on your teaching practice, but on your life in general. So another way is to review, and you can review each lesson, review each day, review each fortnight, and each term, as well as each year, actually. Each lesson is a little bit difficult, particularly if you've got back-to-back lessons. So you might do, 2 lessons review at recess, 2 lessons review at lunch. Again, it comes down to time pressures, and they're already quite strained in schools. So, it can be difficult, but so you may choose to do it daily. But I'll tell you what, the most successful people in the world, regardless of what they do, whether they're teachers or they're billionaires, will reflect. They'll reflect on their performance. So, I talk about billionaire business people, teachers, but also athletes. Anyone who, is successful will do a review. And it's very, very important to review and evaluate your performance in order to go forward, because without doing that, chances are you'll be sitting, once you get to this mucky puddle, it's very hard to get out of without reviewing. So you get stuck in this kind of, in this plateau, and you find it hard to go forward. And at some point, I would challenge you to say that will happen at one point if you don't do some form of review. Your career or your life will plateau in some way, and it will not go forward. You'll keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. and I learned that the hard way in terms of my teaching career. So reviewing at least, like if it's not every lesson but every day, and again, if it's not every day but every fortnight, but what I like the idea of is a very, very short, simple lesson review, and it might just be a verbal thing, it might just be a thought thing, it might just be a couple lines on a piece of paper. How did that lesson go? Boom. So yeah, it might be a daily review, and so asking questions like, what did I do today? And what did I, so it might be 2 questions, what did I do today, and what do I need to do tomorrow, say for example, as a way of planning ahead till tomorrow. Then moving into fortnightly, it could be weekly, but fortnightly just means there's less pressure on doing that, and that could be, in the questions you would ask yourself in there is, what do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? What do I need to continue doing? What do I need to start doing? And what do I need to stop doing? So there's 5. So more of, less of, continue doing, so the same amount of, stop doing and start doing. And those 5 questions are very, very effective for any type of review. I don't think you need them every day, and you certainly don't need them every lesson. But fortnightly, they help you to keep on track in moving forward and performing as a very effective teacher. And then certainly every term reviewing, what happened for the term. And you can use those 5 questions again in order to analyse you moving forward. And then I really like the idea of yearly planning and writing down, what happened throughout the year. And then in that, then coming up with themes and doing, this is from my psychology studies, doing a thematic analysis. So then all that's a fancy word for going, okay, here are the themes that came up through the year, and then just put a number down, so go, okay, this situation, this example of something that happened is part of this theme. This is part of this theme, this is part of this theme, this is part of this theme. And then you have all these other little random ones which kind of don't really fit into a theme, so you might have them in as miscellaneous. And then you'll go through and go count up all of one theme, all of another theme, all of another theme, and go, yep, these are the main themes that came up for the year. Can I put any of these miscellaneous situations into one of them? Do they kind of half fit into one? This one does, this one fits here, this one fits here. Does that influence it too much? Yes, no, whatever. But then you end up with, like, here's the 3 main themes for the year. And that is a very powerful activity. I've started doing that for the last 3 years, and I did it probably the most in-depth for the first time at the end of 2016, start of 2017. And it's led to some unbelievable opportunities. And so I really, encourage you to do that, to review, even if it's just in your head, every lesson that you teach, every day, like even right now, start today, I do daily reviews. Sometimes I miss them. I think my stats are, because I actually do it in an online thing on this website, which is a part of a online course I was doing. So I've actually got the stats, but I think my stats are I kind of do about 75% of the days in a fortnight. But I always do my fortnightly ones. I very rarely miss them. I find them very fun. And it's interesting when you look back, and because I actually do a 3-month review, which is the same as, I suppose, a term review, and you look at like what came up, and you read through those fortnightly reviews, and you're like, man, I just kept saying that every single fortnight, do something about it. And once you can see that, you can really make a change, and you can do something about where your mistakes have been or where you've been underperforming in an area, and you can then move off in the right direction. And life, let me tell you, becomes very, very fulfilling and enjoyable. Other ways for becoming a reflective teacher is just speaking to colleagues. So speaking to colleagues after a lesson, this happened, what do you reckon? Or this annoyed me, or this, I thought we went to do this activity and it just worked so well. It was perfect. The kids loved it, and so on. So speaking to colleagues, listening to them talk about examples in their class. Team teach, because that kind of just naturally fosters that conversation, that reflection. And so because if you're working together, you'll kind of be looking at each other and bouncing off each other and feeding off each other, and you'll just naturally kind of just debrief afterwards and go, oh, what do you think of this, or what do you think of that, or whatever. So team teaching is a way that it kind of can naturally foster that reflection between you and a colleague. And then ask the students, ask them, what did they think? Again, use open questioning, and just ask them what did they like, what didn't they like, what would they improve. So some basic things, and you can even use your questioning from your reviews. What should we do more of? What should we do less of? As an example, what did you like? What didn't you like? What would you do if you were teaching it? And of course, if it's unrealistic, you're not going to put it in there, but you might get some ideas there that you didn't consider yourself, which you can incorporate. So it's very valuable asking the students, because they're the ones, at the end of the day, as a teacher, particularly teaching PE, it's almost like you're a marketer. You're trying to sell sport and physical activity to the students, and so you want them to buy in. You want them to buy your product, and your product is physical education. So they're the important ones, so ask their opinion. Okay, to wrap up, I want you to ponder and discuss this question, and you can pop it on the discussion board. What are some... Oh my goodness, what are some... let me fix this up. What are some... What are some ways... That's what it's supposed to be. What are some ways you could support students' knowledge of human movement in sports and physical education? So consider how you could support them. And then knowledge of human movement in sport and physical education. So to enjoy it and continue on, have that becoming a part of their life. Okay, have a look at this stuff on Module 2. Check out those videos. There's 2 there, this one and this one here. Hope they're working. Please let me know if they're not. Jump on the discussion board and write your response to that question. And that question was at the bottom of Module 2, by the way. You've got the discussion board Module 2, so you can share your ideas in there on that. And I will open up Module 3 very, very soon. So actually I will open that up now, and I will endeavour to get through and fix up any of that which is not flowing smoothly. But you will probably need to bear with me. I've got 5 classes, and getting through all that takes a lot of time. So thanks for joining me in this Module 2 recording. Hope you guys are going well with your assignment. If you've got any questions, please put them in the discussion board, in the student cafe there, so that other students can help answer those questions, which supports and helps me out. I'll jump on and read through and just check that everyone's on the right track, and provide direction where needed. So make sure you get that assignment in. It's going to be due very soon. What is the due date for that? I believe, I've got a feeling it's week 6. No, it's not week 7, Friday 14th of April. So you have still got 1, 2, 3 weeks left. So jump on and continue working on that. Thanks for joining me in this Module 2 recording, and I'll see you in the next recording, which should be up by end of week 5.